Welcome to the Kansas 4-H Horse Safety Webinar. This webinar is intended to give our 4-H horse project members the opportunity to learn correct safety techniques in and out of the show ring, as well as develop good sportsmanship. Let's begin. These may look like really fun ways to mount your horse or to act around your horse, but they're not safe. It is the intention of Kansas 4-H to teach youth to use safe techniques when working with or around horses so that you become a safe horseman. The topics of this webinar include correct and safe attire, how to correctly approach, lead, and move around your horse, correct use and placement of the halter, how to safely tie your horse, how to correctly saddle, safety while mounting to ride, good sportsmanship, and horsemanship in the warm-up pen and the arena. Because horses are prey animals, they respond rapidly to disruptions in their environment. They're sensitive to sight, sounds, touch, and movement, and they're quick to recognize and respond to danger by fighting, fleeing, or bunching together. This response or behavior, known as fight or flight, has allowed horses to survive in the wild. As we work with and are around horses, it's important to understand their behavior for our personal safety as well as the safety of other riders and other horses. Let's begin discussing correct, safe attire when we're working with our horse. When working with horses at home, it is easy to be relaxed about what is worn and how we work around them. It is important to always be safe working around your horse. And one of the first steps is to wear good, safe attire. Beginning from the ground up, always wear boots or closed-toed shoes to protect your feet. Horses are big animals, and their hooves can be dangerous. When horses move quickly, they can step on their handler, causing injury. Be sure to protect your feet. It's important to wear pants while working with your horse as well to protect your legs. Wear well-fitting clothing instead of loose or baggy attire that can get hung up, tied, or torn. A helmet can work as an optional safety measure. A helmet is required for all participants who exhibit in the Hunter Hack classes at the Kansas State Fair. It is not required for Western riders, but riders may choose to wear one. When a helmet is worn, choose one that fits well. The helmet should fit snugly down on the rider's head. It must also be ASTM certified or SCI approved. According to the Kansas 4-H Horse Show Rulebook, the helmet must have a manufacture date within the last 5 years. This date is noted inside the helmet. Helmets are checked during the safety check at the Kansas State Fair. If a rider's helmet does not meet the safety specifications, they are not allowed to exhibit in the Hunter Hack class. Incorrect attire also includes flip-flops, Crocs, or open-toed shoes and shorts, or loose or ill-fitting clothing. Here we see an example of boots. Boots do not have to be Western boots, but boots do need to be worn. According to the 4-H Horse Show dress code found in the 4-H Horse Show Rulebook, exhibitors are required to wear boots, either English or Western, pants, and a long-sleeved shirt while showing. This 4-H'er is exhibiting how to safely approach and halter her horse. She speaks and moves calmly and slowly as she approaches the horse, walking toward the horse's shoulder. She puts the crown piece of the halter around the horse's neck, then proceeds to put the halter on by pulling it over the horse's nose. Notice that a horse's eyes are on the sides of their head instead of in the front. This is what indicates that horses are prey animals versus predators. The eyes of prey animals are located on the sides of their head, preventing them from seeing directly in front of them. They have visual blind spots directly in front of and directly behind them. As a handler approaches a horse, it's important to approach at an angle toward the shoulder. Never approach directly behind your horse and never run at your horse from any direction. In the beginning of this webinar, we talked about the fact that horses respond quickly to sights, sounds, or disruptions to their environment. Running quickly at your horse could startle them and cause serious injury to you and or the horse or other horses around. Let's look at some unsafe approaches. Here, we see the youth run up to her horse. Even though this horse is fairly calm, notice that he does startle when she first runs up to him. We see this through the horse's body language. Pinned ears and turning his body away from the threat, he begins to walk away, using his instinct to flee or remove himself from an uncomfortable situation. This horse shows us that even calm, relaxed horses will try to get away from a perceived threat. In this case, the young person walks right up behind the horse. The horse can't see her until she's right up next to and touches the horse. She is putting herself in an unsafe position, even though she trusts her horse. A horse in this situation could be startled by a noise as she's walking up and could potentially back over the handler. The horse could also bolt or kick. This is a really unsafe situation. When using rope halters, it's important to tie the halter on the horse correctly to ensure the horse is safe. When using a rope halter, make sure the end of the rope is below the loop of the halter. If the knot is above the loop, you may not be able to untie the knot, especially if your horse sets back on the halter and tightens the knot. Take time to look at this diagram to view the correct way to tie a rope halter. Notice in picture 3 that the knot is below the loop of the halter. Now let's look and see what incorrect looks like. Notice in this picture that the knot of the halter is up above the loop of the halter. If this horse were to be tied to something and get startled and set back, it would tighten the knot and it would be really difficult to get the halter off of the horse without cutting it. In showmanship, it is common to use halters with a chain. Let's discuss the proper way to put the chain through the halter. Begin with the chain running through the side ring of the halter on the horse's left side. Run the chain through the side ring under the horse's chin and attach it to the opposite side ring of the halter, or further up where the crown piece attaches. Depending on the length of the chain, it could be attached to the lower ring, but this chain is long, so it's attached to the higher ring. Notice that the clip is turned away from the horse's face, so the rough part of the clip is not rubbing against the horse's cheek. Running the chain in the ring underneath the chin strap and attaching it back to itself is incorrect. This creates a loop that could get hung up on something, or the horse could accidentally step through it if it scratches its head on its leg. If you are a 4-H'er whose horse is not used to the chain underneath its chin, you're encouraged to do your work at home with the chain under the horse's chin. Keep your hands soft and light as you begin in case your horse gets startled and pulls back on the chain. After a horse is caught, the next thing that usually happens is that the horse is led. Maintaining the correct position in relation to your horse is important for your safety. The safest way to lead and turn your horse is from the horse's left side. Walk in a spot that is even with the horse's throat latch or shoulder, with your right hand holding the lead about 15 inches away from the head of the horse. Your left hand should be holding the remainder of the lead neatly coiled into one large loop. While walking, keep your eyes forward, looking the direction that you're going. You will notice that when you're not looking where you're going, you tend to drift off to the direction that you're looking. That's why it's really important to look where you're going. Don't coil the rope tightly around your hand. This is unsafe because a bolting horse will cause a tightly coiled lead to tighten very quickly around your hand. This could potentially pull fingers off and cause serious injury to the hand. Make sure to carry the lead with one hand, with your right hand on the lead closest to the horse's face and the remainder of the lead in one large loop. Another incorrect way to carry the lead would be to allow the excess lead to drag on the ground and to not be looking where you're going. Let's watch as this handler correctly leads her horse. Notice she walks about even with the horse's throat latch. She's got about 12 to 15 inches of lead between her right hand and the horse, and the extra lead is carried in a large loop in her left hand. She's also looking in the direction that she's walking. In this example, the handler doesn't even hold on to the lead with her right hand. Part of the time she's looking all over the place. The excess lead is dragging on the ground, and it's getting tangled up in her legs. It could also potentially get tangled up in the horse's legs and scare the horse, or the handler could get stepped on by the horse. Make sure you're not dragging the excess lead. To turn a horse when leading, there's a safe way and an unsafe way. If you are turning more than 90 degrees or more than 1/4 of a turn, always turn the horse away from you. This prevents the horse from running over you if it were to get startled or spooked and bolt. Putting yourself in this position would result in the horse running over the top of you or stepping on you if it were to bolt. This could potentially cause injury, and you generally have less control turning in this manner. In this example, notice that this horse is correctly holding a pivot foot as she turns. Holding a pivot foot is not something that is necessary when leading a horse. However, it's something that you might want to work on so that you perform better in your showmanship class. The handler is walking toward the horse. She's got her eyes where she's going. She looks forward in the direction she's turning. If you are pulling the horse toward you when turning, you're unable to watch the direction you're going. This doesn't allow us to have good eyes on the horse to know what the horse is doing. Here's an incorrect example. Notice the handler here is pulling the horse toward him. He's kind of watching where he's going, but he has no idea what his horse's body position is. It's important to watch where you're going while leading and turning your horse. Walk toward the horse so that you have eyes on the horse and where you're going as you turn. Tying a horse correctly is important to the horse's safety as well as ours. Be sure to tie to a sturdy and immovable post or fence. Make sure to tie to an upright on a fence if you can, rather than a pole that is horizontal. Use a quick release knot and tie the horse at their natural head position. When you're tying a quick release knot, it's important not to put the tail end of the lead back through the loop. Oftentimes this is done because horses can be good at untying themselves. But if the excess lead is draped back through the loop, it's no longer a safe, quick-release knot if the horse were to set back or spook and need to be released quickly. Make sure to tie the horse with enough slack that they're standing comfortably. It is common to tie other species of livestock we exhibit with their head high and close to the fence. Horses shouldn't be tied high and tight. It's also important to tie a horse that has been trained to tie safely. Here's the correct way to tie a safety knot. The handler walks up to a sturdy, immovable fence. She's tying to an upright now. The post she ties to must be a little bit above the horse's head, but she's tying with enough slack so that the horse can stand with its head in the natural position. Here's an example of an incorrect place to tie the horse. There's a lot of slack left in the lead rope. The horse is tied well below his natural position and well below his withers. This horse could potentially step over the lead and get caught up in it. Another unsafe practice is to leave your halter hanging, tied, and not attached to a horse. If a horse or something else walks by this hanging halter, it could easily get caught up in the halter and could cause a wreck. When horses are tied, it's important to also know how to move safely from one side to the other side around them. Remember, horses have a visual blind spot directly in front of and directly behind them. Horses have great peripheral vision, so they can see on both sides of them very easily. If we understand how horses see and understand their behavior, we can move around them correctly. Make sure that you approach near your horse's shoulder when you're moving from one side to the other. Run your hand along the side of your horse and maintain contact. Then, you have two options for crossing behind your horse. The first is to make sure that you're either running your hand over the rump and walking very closely to the back legs. In this instance, the horse may still try to kick, but it's going to hurt a lot less. There isn't enough momentum to kick you very hard because you're going to be right up next to the horse. The second option is to make sure that you walk behind the horse well outside of kicking range. Incorrect ways to do this would be walking directly up from behind your horse. Earlier, you saw our young person approach her horse from directly behind and within kicking range. Remember that horses cannot see directly in front or behind. Therefore, crossing under the halter of a tied horse in front of them is also unsafe. This is a behavior that we see from riders, often especially when they're very comfortable with their horses. Crossing under a horse is very dangerous because when something startles them from behind, they could potentially strike you from the front, step on you, or knock you down, causing you to end up in an even more unsafe situation with injury. In this series of pictures, watch how this person moves from side to side. Notice in this picture she is well outside of kicking range. As she's moving from one side of the horse to the other, she's within the horse's peripheral vision. He can see her, he knows where she is, and she's safe because if he should decide to kick, she's not within kicking range. As she crosses over to the other side, she maintains that distance. In this example, she's walked up to his shoulder. She runs her hand along his body and rump, over his croup as she crosses behind. She's right up next to the horse. If he should decide to kick, he's not getting a lot of momentum before he would actually hit her. Maintaining that contact lets the horse know that she's there, and he's less likely to kick. She maintains contact all the way around the horse. Caring for horses requires that we pick up their hooves. It's really important that this is done in a safe manner. Again, always approach your horse at an angle toward the shoulder. With your back toward the horse's head, run your hand from the shoulder down the leg. Keeping your knees slightly bent, pinch slightly above the horse's fetlock. As you apply pressure to the fetlock, the horse should raise its hoof. Cradle the hoof with the hand closest to the horse and use the opposite hand to clean it. After you've finished cleaning the hoof, place it down carefully away from your own feet. Don't just drop the hoof or let it fall. When picking up a rear foot, approach the shoulder or the side of the horse. We're going to run our hand down over the horse's hip and down the hind leg. With your back to the horse's head, apply pressure slightly above the fetlock until the horse raises its foot, and keep your body even with the horse's flank to avoid being in the kick zone. After you're finished cleaning the hoof, place it down carefully. Here are some examples. Notice as this handler begins cleaning her horse's hoof, she's always scraping away from her. And she does this because the hoof pick may slip and could potentially hit her. It's always safer to scrape away from you. Here she keeps her back toward the horse's head. She cleaned out the horse's hoof, and when she's finished, she gently sets the hoof down instead of just letting it fall. After grooming and getting your horse ready to ride, it's time to put on the saddle pad and saddle. Make sure to do this correctly so it's comfortable and safe for the rider as well as the horse. First, make sure that the pad is clean and free of debris. As you place the pad on your horse's back over his withers, make sure that there's enough space between the pad and the horse's withers so that your fingers can fit through. Make sure that the excess material of the pad is even around the saddle. This picture shows the pad correctly placed on the horse's back, up on its withers. It's not too far up on the horse's neck, and it's not clear back on his back. This allows the rider to correctly place the saddle on the pad. Here are a couple of incorrect examples. This pad is too far up, so if the saddle were to be placed here, it would not sit correctly on the horse's withers. This would be very uncomfortable and unsafe. Looking at the placement on the right, the pad is too far back. When cinched, the cinch would be well behind where it's supposed to lie against the horse's body. With this placement, the saddle would not sit correctly on the withers. It would be an uncomfortable ride for both the horse and the rider, and potentially unsafe as the saddle could slip. To correctly place the saddle, locate the horse's scapula or shoulder blade. Feel for it with your fingertips while your horse is standing still. You should be able to feel the muscle-covered edge of the bone as it drops off toward the rear of the horse. Curl your fingers over it and you'll make a note of this position. Once you've done this several times, you'll have a good understanding of where this is and you won't have to feel every time. Place the saddle and the pad on top of the horse and keep in mind that the front concho of the saddle should be located right on top of or in line with the area where you curled your fingertips over your horse's shoulder blade. Double check that the saddle is placed correctly and note where the cinch lies when you tighten it. There should be about a hand's breadth of open space between the horse's elbow and where the front edge of the cinch lies. After the saddle has been placed, lift it up a bit so there is space between the saddle pad and the horse's withers. Here's an example of incorrect placement. Notice the saddle on the left. There's a space between the horse's withers and the pad. The saddle is placed too far forward on the horse's withers, and there's not enough space between the horse's elbow and the cinch. On the right, the saddle is too far back. There is more than a hand's breadth between that horse's elbow and the cinch. Correct bit placement. We're going to address the use of two types of bits today, the curb bit and the snaffle bit. Correct bit placement is necessary for the comfort and safety of the horse. When the curb bit is correctly placed in the horse's mouth, there should be no wrinkles next to the mouth. Snaffle bits are used when showing horses that are 5 years and younger. The bit should lie against the corners of the horse's mouth. A correctly adjusted snaffle should have about 1 to 2 wrinkles in the corner of the horse's mouth. There is a safe and unsafe way to mount and dismount your horse. First, check the girth or cinch to make sure that it's appropriately tightened. Place the reins over your horse's neck and keep hold of them at all times so that you have control of your horse. Hold the reins in your left hand along with a chunk of your horse's mane to prevent the horse from walking away. Stand with your back to your horse's head and turn the stirrup toward you. Place your left foot in the stirrup. Take a couple of bounces and pull yourself up. Using the saddle horn, swing your right leg over the horse's rump and be careful not to kick the horse. Let yourself down gently into the saddle. To correctly dismount, stand in the stirrups, swing your right leg over your horse's rump, being careful not to kick him, and keep your left leg straight. Stand in your left stirrup until your right leg is completely over the rump. Once both legs are on the left side of your horse, take your left foot out of the stirrup and slide carefully to the ground. Don't leave your left foot in the stirrup while sliding to the ground. If your horse would spook or move, you could get hung up in the saddle and potentially dragged. Let's watch some examples of how to mount correctly. In this video, the rider checked her cinch first. She made sure that the girth was appropriately tightened and begins to put the reins over her horse's neck. She always keeps hold of her horse. Next, she turns the stirrup toward her, puts her foot in it, and pulls herself up onto her horse. Notice that she's careful not to kick her horse as she swings her right leg over. As she dismounts, she's careful not to kick her horse. She kicks free of the stirrup and drops to the ground. In this example, the rider leaves her foot in the stirrup. She's still holding onto her horse, but if the horse were to move to the side, her foot could get hung up. She could fall or she could be dragged. In the next section, we'll discuss safety and sportsmanship in the warm-up pen, the make-up pen, and the arena. These are some important things to take note of. Evaluate where you are in learning and where your horse is, and whether you or your horse are ready to correctly move in the arena during a riding class. If you're not ready, the state fair may not be the best choice for you. It's okay to take more time to work at home to prepare and be safe at the state fair. Here are the do's and don'ts of horse show safety and sportsmanship. Always allow 1 to 1.5 horse lengths between horses. Be mindful of other exhibitors in the warm-up pen and the make-up pen. While you're in the arena for classes, this is for safety and good sportsmanship. If we're not being mindful of where others are, specifically when showing in a class, we could cause them to have trouble in that class and affect their placing. Don't ever be the cause of someone else placing lower than where they should be. Think ahead. If you're on the arena rail, begin passing 1.5 horse lengths behind the horse in front of you. As you pass the horse, then move back to the rail when you're 1.5 horse lengths past that horse. Always make sure to look ahead and behind you, especially if you need to stop and back. Make sure you know what's behind you on the rail. Don't get too close when you're standing beside or behind another horse. Don't allow your horse to sniff another horse. Don't tailgate on the rail. Never get distracted, and make sure that you don't stop and back on the rail without looking where you're going. In the first video, the exhibitors are walking at a correct distance. There's approximately 1 horse length to 1.5 horses between the palomino and the sorrel. This keeps the exhibitor with the sorrel horse well outside of kicking range of the palomino. In this example, the sorrel horse is following too closely. This could result in the exhibitor leading the sorrel horse to be kicked if the palomino horse decides to kick out. When you're in the makeup pen or the halter ring, make sure to keep at least a horse length between horses while standing and waiting. This is also true when you're leading your horse or riding. Notice the horses in the picture on the left are standing side by side in the makeup pen, and there's at least a horse length between them. If they were to be in a class, this would allow a judge to safely walk around their horses. On the right, the handlers are too close. The handler holding the palomino is well within kicking range, and if they were to be in a halter class or a showmanship class, they are not allowing enough space for a judge to walk between the horses and adequately evaluate them. Never let unfamiliar horses sniff each other. If you allow this, it could be followed by kicking, biting, or striking. The 2 horses here seem pretty calm and relaxed. It appears that these exhibitors are safe. However, allowing their horses to sniff is unsafe behavior. In this video, the horses are correctly moving along the rail. There's at least a horse length or 1.5 horses between them, and the riders maintain this distance at all times. Horses do not all move at the same speed, and they have different stride lengths, so some will move along the rail faster. It will be necessary to do some things to maintain safe traveling distances along the rail. Let's talk about how to do that. If you are moving up too closely to the horse in front of you, whether it's in the class or in the makeup ring, make sure to pass correctly and safely. It isn't necessary to try to slow your horse down. You just need to pass correctly. The paint horse in this example starts to pull away from the rail when he's 1.5 horse lengths behind the bay, then moves far out from the bay to the inside of the rail, and then begins to go back to the rail when he's 1.5 horse lengths away from the bay. This is an example of tailgating. The paint is moving much quicker. Notice the rider tries to slow her horse down by pulling on the reins. However, she's still within the kicking range, and this creates an unsafe opportunity for both of our horses and riders. This is an example of cutting off when passing. Notice that the paint moved out like she was supposed to originally, but she moved in too close to the bay when she got back along the rail. This caused the rider of the bay to have to pull her horse up, which is distracting and detrimental to the bay's performance in a class. In this example, the rider on the bay stops and backs her horse on the rail without looking. This causes an unsafe environment for the rider on the paint. She has to pull away from the rail to avoid being backed into. Stopping and backing without checking behind you is inappropriate and unsafe whether you're in the warm-up pen or showing in a class. Always make sure to look behind you when backing. To summarize, horses are sensitive, curious animals. Understand the natural behavior of horses. When you understand how they naturally behave, you'll have a better understanding of how you should move around them and work with them. Never stand directly behind or in front of your horse. Horses' eyes are on the side of their head, and they have natural blind spots directly in front of and directly behind them. Horses have great peripheral vision, but they don't see well directly in front of or behind them. Don't lead a horse while you're standing directly in front of or behind it. Always be aware of your surroundings because your horse is. Dress appropriately, pay attention, be cautious, and be courteous to other horses and riders. I'd like to thank our 4-H members and volunteers, as well as the Kansas State University Department of Animal Science for their assistance in providing video footage and photos for this video. As a reminder, after watching the video, complete the exam with a passing grade of 75% or better in order to exhibit at the Kansas State Fair 4-H Horse Show. Both the video and the exam must be completed by the entry deadline of August 1st for the State Fair 4-H Horse Show. We look forward to seeing you at the Kansas State Fair.